From unprecedented rain this summer to heat waves in September, everyone is asking what is going on with our weather. Joe Della Carpini from the National Weather Service gives us an outlook for the fall and explains what is happening with El Nino.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Della Carpini. I'm the meteorologist and science and operations officer with the National Weather Service in Boston Norton, also a Norwood resident, and here today to talk about the outlook for fall of 2023. So before we do that, just wanted to give a quick overview of our summer weather pattern. I don't think it's much of a surprise that it was an overly wet and cool summer. And here's the reason why. If we look on the left, this is kind of the steering flow of the atmosphere up at about 18,000 feet or so. And you can see there was a fairly persistent, what we call a trough or a dip in the jet stream over the eastern United States, while there was more of a bump or what's called a ridge in the west. And no doubt, this always leads to wet and cool weather when we see this kind of pattern. But if you remember, in the desert Southwest, they had a lot of extreme heat, even over into the plain states much of the summer. And that's the reason why this big ridge really dominated out in the west, while, again, this persistent, what we call a trough here in the east, really led to some cool and wet weather. And on the right-hand side, you can see the blue and purple shading indicating that this was fairly abnormal, really not something that we normally see in the summer. So no doubt it led to an overly wet and cool summer here in New England. And here's a look at our rainfall here in Norwood. And again, not much of a surprise that we were above normal. The gray line represents kind of the average rainfall, and that's a 30-year average. And the green curve shows the observed rainfall through much of the summer. So starting in June, you can see we're fairly close to normal right along with the green and the gray line. But then as we got into the latter part of June and especially July, you'll see this curve gets much, much higher than the gray line and even into August. So we had so many rounds of showers and thunderstorms throughout the summer that we ended up well above average. And I don't think that's, again, much of a surprise to anybody. The lawns did well, the gardens did well. For the summer months, which we consider June, July, and August for climatological purposes, you can see the total in Norwood was just a touch over 20 inches. And our normal really is about 15 inches. So we were running nearly 5 inches above normal for the summer, which is pretty impressive, and certainly a change from last year when we had such severe drought conditions throughout the region. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the fall and even a little bit of sneak peek into the winter. And our main driver is expected to be El Nino. If you remember, about this time last year, we were talking about La Nina, which is a cooling of the ocean waters in the Pacific off the coast of South America. And we expected a transition to El Nino in the spring, and that certainly happened. And right now, we're actually into El Nino, which is a warming of the water. It's actually the opposite of La Nina. So we now have warmer than average water temperatures off the coast of South America, and that does have some influence on the jet stream throughout the world. So that's going to be our dominant weather pattern as we go through the fall and the winter and possibly into much of next year as well. So as I mentioned, El Nino has emerged. This is a look at the sea surface temperatures, kind of the difference from normal in August and September. And you can see certainly some warm red colors here off the coast of South America across much of the central and eastern Pacific. So that's indicative that El Nino has developed. And as we go through the fall and the winter, you'll see most of our climate models show it persisting. Anything above this black line is El Nino, and below it is La Nina. There is one lone model or few that show La Nina developing next year. But as we go into the fall, really September, October, November, this line here, all of our climate models show El Nino persisting and maybe even strengthening a little bit. And another climate model here on the right shows a pretty high chance that El Nino is going to persist into next year. So again, that's going to be our main climate driver as we head through the winter. Now, here's the official fall outlook from the National Weather Service. This contains the month of September, October, and November, which we define as our climatological fall. And you can see a fairly high probability here of above average temperatures throughout much of New England. So there's pretty high confidence that it's going to be warmer than normal. Now, this doesn't mean, 80s and 90s. Our normals are getting cooler as we head later in the year. So maybe more like 60s, maybe a few days of 70, some very nice fall weather. And on the right-hand side, not much of an indication that we're going to see precipitation above or below average. There's really nothing leaning us either way. So for now, the forecasters are kind of equal chances of either drier or wetter than average weather. And just as a reminder, here in the Northeast, our weather patterns tend to occur in cycles of weeks, not really months. So these seasonal outlooks, while they are valuable, they really don't give us the whole picture as to what we can expect for an entire season. So we have a little more confidence in our weather patterns week to week, as opposed to kind of months at a time. And for those who are interested, we'll give you a little sneak peek of our winter outlook, December, January, and February. And this really follows the El Nino pattern for the most part, with above average temperatures across most of the northern tier of states and really wetter than average weather along the Gulf Coast. We tend to see a storm track that emerges from the Gulf Coast and off the southeast coast of the United States during El Nino years. Now, for snow lovers, that can be good for us because some of these storms will eventually come up the East Coast if everything comes together and can give us some heavy snow. Other times, the storm track stays a little bit to the south, so cities like Washington, D.C., Philadelphia can be favored more for heavy snow than us. In those situations, we tend to just be kind of dry and cold. So we'll kind of see how things pan out. As I mentioned, our weather patterns occur in cycles of weeks, so we can usually tell about 2 to 4 weeks ahead of time how things are setting up, but it does vary throughout the winter. So again, above average temperatures for the winter, not meaning 60s and 70s, but probably some days of 40s, maybe a 50-degree reading here and there. And again, no real signal as to above or below average precipitation as we extend this through the winter. But we'll take a look at the winter outlook in another presentation. So just to summarize, we experienced a cooler and wetter than normal summer, and that was due to that really persistent trough over the eastern United States. As I mentioned, El Nino has developed. It's forecast to persist through at least the upcoming winter, if not longer. And this tends to favor above average temperatures in New England and either near, maybe slightly above average precipitation, again, depending upon that storm track that we see. And for those who are interested on fall foliage, it's not something that we really do as meteorologists, but we always get questions. So we always have the answer in our back pocket. The fall foliage really should feature brighter colors than it did last year. When we see wet weather in the summer, followed by drier and cooler weather in the fall, that tends to bring out a lot of color. So the drought years tend to really inhibit the fall foliage. But this year, if we do end up drying out in the fall here, I would expect to see some really nice color throughout much of the region. So that's some good news. So let's look at our fall 2023 outlook. Again, my name is Joe Deli Carpini, meteorologist at the National Weather Service, also a Norwood resident. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to send me an email. It's joseph.delicarpini@noaa.gov. Thanks for listening.